Thank you, everyone. Hi, it's good to be here today. And I appreciate you guys coming out. I know I'm probably standing between you and drinks, so I'll try to keep it quick. I just wanted to talk a little bit about some of the things that we've been seeing during the last few months, because obviously this year has been quite a challenging year, both macroeconomically as well as particularly in the Web3 business. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Robbie. I'm the CEO of Animoca Brands, and we are fundamentally a game company, but we are also a very active investor in Web3. So we make all kinds of games from studios around the world, and we're also a very active, as I said, investor both in infrastructure as well as all kinds of content and entertainment businesses across Web3. So in thinking about some of the trends this year, and I think this is obvious at any event you go to or any publication you pick up, AI is at the top of everybody's mind, right? And what is it about AI? AI is something that we should all be using. It's something we should all be terrified of. It's coming to take our jobs, and it's going to dominate the world. But I think the most important thing is to think about some of the actual tangible use cases for AI that we see these days. And we're very lucky in the game business because we see a lot of these right on our doorstep, because actually AI is particularly good, especially the first generations of AI, for doing things like generative art. And we're big consumers of art in the gaming world. So I thought I would show you a couple of examples. This is from a company called Blockade Games, and this is something that they've been working on for a while. And the idea that they wanted to solve was generative AI is actually very good at making two-dimensional images, particularly photographic images. But it's not so good actually at 3D spaces yet. It will get there, but not quite yet. And so they wanted to see if they could sort of push the envelope and try to make 3D spaces, but solely from a text prompt. And so this is what they came up with. So essentially what you can do here is you can put in a single text prompt, and it will create a full 360-degree panable three-dimensional space. And so for game makers or anybody who's doing visual narrative storytelling, it's a fantastic tool because, traditionally we would have a group of creatives in the room and they would draw out storyboards and they would talk about ideas, and this would be like weeks back and forth with storyboards trying to come up with the scene from their imagination and get everybody around the table understanding the ideas that they want to share. And now we can do this with a single text prompt. We're like, oh, we want to see Vikings in space. Okay, there you go, Vikings in space. And you get 3 dimensions. But the cool thing about AI is how fast it moves. And I'm sure you've seen this with the different iterations of things like ChatGPT, where you just start to get used to playing around with some of these tools, and then 3 months later, boom, something new, and it blows your mind. And so what they've been working on now, 3 months later, is taking those 3D spaces, and this is an early demo, but then knitting them together so that they become panable and have depth and motion. And so I think that, it's an early demo, but I think what it shows you is, in a mere span of a quarter, how they can go from something that's just completely static to something that's immersive and has depth. Because what this says to me is, where will they be next year? And that's actually the exciting part. So another example, which is slightly different, but also comes from our game industry, is something called Rosebud AI. And what Rosebud does is they didn't focus so much on the generative art side, but they focused on the ability to generate code. Because of course, AI also knows how to code. And so when we think about making games, another thing that we can do is experiment with making the coding of games more accessible to broader audiences. And so what you'll see here in this demo is the idea of using a text prompt to generate the code and therefore build and compile a game. And in addition, you can then submit subsequent text prompts to modify that game, modify the attributes, modify the types of objects in the game, the way the gameplay works, and so on. So I think this gives you a little bit of a glimpse into the potential for how we can leverage these tools, not so much to kind of replace people on our team. I don't think that's really the goal, but thinking about ways to make them incredibly efficient, to think about all the hours that coders used to spend and designers used to spend crafting ideas and winnowing them down from dozens of ideas to single ideas, that time scale can all be compressed now because the technology can take care of a lot of the busy work in the middle. And so I think that, to me, is really what's exciting me about AI at the moment. And the last one I will give you as an example is an AI example from the perspective of the gamer or the player themselves. And this is something that I think is pretty cool. So in gaming, for a long time, we've had what we call NPCs, or non-playable characters. NPCs are all those background characters. When you're in Grand Theft Auto, they're the pedestrians who get inadvertently run over by the car, or the zombies that you kill with your machete, or something like that. And they're largely inert, robotic characters in the background. Bots, right? And so what's the difference between a bot and AI? Really just how intelligent it is. And so here's an example of a very hyper-realistic 3D world in Unreal 5. And the cool thing about when you start to apply AI and large language models to non-playable characters is that it starts to change how you experience the content. Because every actor that you see in that environment becomes a real character with dialogue and with emotion and with ideas. So you can stop somebody on the streets and you can have a conversation with them. You can just observe two people on the street and listen to their conversation. And you can leave and you can go back and it will be different and it will be unique. And so it changes the experience where you can also have all kinds of passive experiences as well as interactive experiences. And it really changes the medium dramatically. So I think you'll be seeing a lot more of this, particularly in console gaming and very large, immersive, like MMO-style games, because AI really brings these characters to life. So it's not just about you as the focal point as the player, but you are part of a bigger world of interactivity at that point. So, talking about our industry. So I put up this, this is the Web3 version of the bat signal. So this is ApeCoin. And this is actually a photo a friend of mine took in Hong Kong 2 weeks ago. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the events of the last few weeks, only because I think it's a good litmus test of where we are right now in the Web3 community. So what happened was we had 2 events in Hong Kong, which we worked a lot on because that's our hometown. We had FinTech Week, followed by ApeFest. So Yuga Labs moved ApeFest for the first time outside the US to Hong Kong. And it was really interesting because it was a chance for a particular segment of the Web3 community to get together and have their annual event and engage in all kinds of Web3 related activities. And I think it's particularly interesting because I think Yuga Labs as a team has done a great job of kind of setting out a roadmap of what's possible leveraging Web3 technology to build communities and to build IP and to build a brand within Web3. And a lot of that was in evidence in what was happening in Hong Kong. And obviously the atmosphere and the vibe was amazing. I think probably the biggest testament to the success of the event that I can sort of give as an anecdote is that there were people who showed up from the US who got a passport for the first time in their lives to go to ApeFest in Hong Kong. And that's a big deal. So I think, it's something that is maybe a little bit more lost on people in Europe, but not all Americans have passports. And so I think I wanted to talk a little bit about what happened at ApeFest because I think it was an opportunity for a largely US-centric brand to really connect with the fan base and the audience that they have in Asia. And I think perhaps to the surprise of a lot of the core community who had met at previous ApeFests adjacent to the NFT NYC event in New York, they really saw that there are sub-communities in Thailand and in the Philippines and in Indonesia and Taiwan and China and all of these fans who are holders of various Yuga Labs properties who want to participate in the event but perhaps had not been able to go to the US previously. And so I think it gave them a very broad, an idea of just how broad the ecosystem of community members and fans there were. But interestingly, it goes back, I think, to a great example of what we consider to be one of the fundamental tenets of Web3. So Web3 is, of course, all about ownership and about the transfer of value digitally between people. But the most important aspect of that is that it's done in an open way. And when we do it in an open way, what we talk about a lot is the fact that these assets that we're trading back and forth amongst each other are permissionless assets. And by permissionless, it means that we create the asset and then it exists in the world. And anybody can do anything they like with it, just like a physical asset. And it's a strange concept in the digital world because we're so accustomed to assets being locked within pieces of software or within software platforms or online platforms. But the power of a permissionless asset, I think, is best exemplified by the automobile. Because the automobile is a permissionless asset. When you buy a car, if you buy what is this, I think, a Volvo. When you buy a Volvo, you're not limited to only driving on roads paved by the Volvo company. You can drive on any road, right? But if we live in the world of Web 2 software, you can only go on the roads that are permitted by the developer of the software who made your car, right? If I have a car in Grand Theft Auto, I cannot bring it into any other racing game. It must live only in Grand Theft Auto. But more importantly, because this is a permissionless asset, it gives rise to all kinds of other businesses, and that's what you see on the slide here, right? You can make things like car baby seats, you can make tires, you can make petrol stations, insurance companies, Uber. All of these businesses were created because of the existence of a permissionless asset, which was the automobile. So if we extend this analogy to digital space, then what is the power of permissionless assets in digital space? Well, I think a great example of that, going back to ApeFest, are the properties in the Yuga Labs portfolio, which are the Bored Apes, the Mutant Apes, the Kennel Club, etc. All of these different IPs which are owned by the community of owners who own those individual PFPs. And so what we see is an outpouring of creativity within this IP ecosystem that is community owned. Here's an example from our portfolio. So our studio, Enway in California, made a game called Rec League. And it's a PvP fighting game on mobile. And Rec League employs characters from the Bored Ape universe and features sort of lore and story from the Other Side metaverse, which has been created by Yuga Labs. So you as a Bored Ape holder can go and play the game, and your ape is inside the robot mech there. And because you show up at the game with your Bored Ape, you get certain powers, you get certain robots and certain treatment as a special, essentially, VIP customer. We don't restrict the game only to Bored Ape holders, but we treat you specially because you're part of the community. And we see the same thing happening with Legends of Morrow, which launched a month later, which is, again, another game made by a third-party developer, but leveraging the IP from within the Bored Ape ecosystem, because these are permissionless assets. So it means a game developer can actually benefit from the incredible community of players and owners within the Bored Ape ecosystem. And that's a great thing for us, for example, as a game developer, because you can see here are 10,000 people who are, very loyal, high spending, and love technology, and they're perfect candidates to be players of games. And so why wouldn't we want to cater to that audience? And because these are permissionless assets, we can then create products for that audience. But it's not just limited to digital products, of course. Here is, from California, Bored and Hungry. Although, just note that that is the Philippines, London, and the pop-up store in Hong Kong. So this is actually the global world domination strategy of Bored and Hungry burgers and fries. But again, this is a franchise of fast food which is created based on IP that's owned by that individual Bored Ape holder. So they've built a brand franchise for this business on IP that they co-own with the rest of the community. And this is something that's unique to Web3. We see this on a professional basis. So on the right-hand side, you can see Vivienne Tam, award-winning fashion designer who featured her collection of Bored Ape-inspired fashion at New York Fashion Week last year. And on the left side, you can see the inevitable collaboration with A Bathing Ape, as many of you might know, the Japanese fashion brand from the early 2000s. So these are examples of, again, being able to collaborate with IP and brands in a very new and novel way because it's community owned and because these assets are permissionless assets. And the last one I'm going to show you, just because it's cool, is going back to automobiles, a collaboration between BMW and Yuga. And this was a way to think about personalization and customization using these digital assets on top of a physical car. Actually, I think one of the things that this most represents, to be honest, is the power of the Web3 demographic as an audience, because clearly BMW feels that the ApeFest customers are their core customer base for launching a new car, and hence such a collaboration really works. So I think these are great indicators of where we are in the Web3 market right now. I feel like the energy and the excitement has really come back after a relatively slow first half of this year. Obviously, the economic environment hasn't been great. NFT volumes have been low. Bitcoin and Ethereum have been low for the first half of the year, so people were getting kind of into a funk. But I definitely feel like we've gotten our groove back. And one of the best ways, I think, from a cultural standpoint, to kind of put a finger in the wind and get a take on where we are would be, number one, financial markets. So if you look at the price of ETH, BTC, and Solana, I mean, they've been on a tear for the last month, well, 2 months. And so with Bitcoin at $38,000, I think it's a rising tide that tends to lift all boats. While we in the entertainment industry are not strictly linked to what happens in financial markets, it doesn't hurt, it helps, so that's a good thing. But unlike 4 or 5 years ago, we're not tied at the hip to the value of different cryptocurrencies, which is nice. But from a cultural standpoint, there's one other thing that many of you might have seen that came out in the last week or so, which hasn't happened since March of 2021, and that is, of course, NFTs and Web3 being on The Simpsons. And so if anything says we're back, this would be it. Anyway, it's a great episode if you have a chance to take a look, because honestly, the amount of research they did on Web3 culture is extraordinary. But I think, it really taps into the zeitgeist of what's going on, because of course, the last time The Simpsons talked about NFTs was just following the sale of Beeple's artwork, the 10,000 Every Days, for $69 million at Christie's. So I think we're back on the agenda of popular culture, which is definitely not a bad thing. So thank you very much. I really appreciate all your time.